Red China has infiltrated nearly every aspect of free societies, threatening economic security and democratic values, limiting free speech, co-opting, and corrupting politicians and businesses, stealing invaluable social and cultural identities, along with scientific research, data and development. The ongoing dispute between Australia and China may seem like a regional trade war, fought out in a remote corner of the planet. But it matters around the world. China is the largest trade partner with Australia. But the latest trade dispute reveals a deeper concern from the Australian government about how Red China is bullying its neighbor to get its way. Red China infiltrates businesses and the political process in Australia and New Zealand, using coercion and political influence with money, power, and intimidation. Australia accuses Red China of interfering with its political system. In 2018, Chinese casino tycoon, Jack Lam, who has close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, donated to Prime Minister Tony Abbott's re-election campaign. Jack Lam also is a fugitive from the Philippines, who was charged with bribery. In January 2019, foreign donations to political parties were banned after revelations surrounding billionaire Chinese donor, Huang Shangmo. Huang Shangmo is a real estate developer, who has ties to the Chinese Communist Party. He donated millions of dollars to political parties in Australia. Although, when confronted by journalists, he denied having any connections to the CCP.
ABC for Connors, we'd like to ask you about your relationship to the Chinese Communist Party.
我们就想问你一些问题，我们就想问你的关系跟中国的共产党。
我没有这个关系。
Is the Chinese Communist Party directing you to donate to Australian political parties?
No.
没有。
Huang came to Australia in 2011. He quickly rose to become a leading pro-China lobbyist, courting politicians, and donating at least $2 million to Australian political parties through his companies. His request for Australian citizenship was denied, and his permanent residency was voided, amid concerns about his links to the Chinese Communist Party. Red China undermines the very foundations of democracy through its secret weapon, the United Front. Red China's United Front is a political strategy and network of groups and key individuals that are influenced or controlled by the Chinese Communist Party to advance its interests. The United Front engages in various types of political warfare for the CCP. Under Xi Jinping, the United Front reaches its long tentacles into many industrialized countries. Part of the United Front's work is to export its influence through Australians' universities. It oversees front organizations and their affiliates in multiple countries, such as the Chinese Students and Scholars Association and the Confucius Institute. Red China claims that these organizations help Chinese students and academics studying or residing in the West to conduct people-to-people diplomacy on behalf of the People's Republic of China. But in fact, they are spy networks infiltrating the Australian university system. Scientific research from these universities, with the participation of the Chinese students and PhD candidates, would end up in Red China's hands. Chinese student groups also engaged in attempts to silence free speech that criticize Red China. Conflict played out when clashes between the University of Queensland pro-China and pro-democracy student groups. Red China has tried to gain access to and influence United States political circles with its operatives. A suspected Chinese intelligence operative developed extensive ties with local and national politicians, including a U.S. congressman, in an operation run by China's spy agency between 2011 and 2015. A Chinese national named Fang Fang or Christine Fang targeted up-and-coming local politicians in the San Francisco Bay Area and across the country who had the potential to make it big on the national stage. Through campaign fundraising, extensive networking, personal charisma, and romantic or sexual relationships with at least 2 Midwestern mayors, Fang was able to gain proximity to political power. Among the most significant targets of Fang's efforts was Representative Eric Swalwell from California. Fang took part in fundraising activity for Swalwell's 2014 re-election campaign. Fang helped place at least one intern in Swalwell's office, and interacted with Swalwell at multiple events over the course of several years. U.S. officials first noticed Fang through surveillance they were conducting on a different person. The suspected officer used the consulate as a base to do outreach to state and local level U.S. politicians, including inviting them on trips to China. Both Fang and the suspected officer were focused on gathering political intelligence and conducting influence operations in the Bay Area. Senior U.S. intelligence officials provided multiple defensive briefings around 2015 to warn targeted local and national politicians about Fang's connections to Chinese intelligence and potential Chinese assets in their offices. Red China's intelligence operation broke up in mid-2015, when Fang left the U.S. amid the FBI-led probe.
And while Phong has now left the country, U.S. officials have no doubt that China will try to gather political intelligence in the U.S. any way they can.
Keeping tabs on Chinese diaspora communities is a top priority of China's intelligence services. China's spy services want to influence these communities to become more predisposed to the regime, as well as surveil and stamp out potential organized opposition to the Communist Party.
We are going to begin with breaking news. A New York cop moments ago appearing before a judge. Babanagi's Anweiing, accused of working for the Chinese government.
Federal prosecutors say the Long Island resident passed on information about potential threats to the Chinese government, as well as details about the Tibetan community here in the U.S.
Former U.S. politicians are working as lobbyists for Chinese companies, influencing policies and legislatures on the behalf of Red China. Joe Lieberman, a former politician and vice president hopeful, worked as a lobbyist for ZTE, a Chinese communication company, in 2019. Meanwhile, Ed Royce, a former congressman, serving a large Asian American population in Southern California. While in office, he defended Taiwan against China. After leaving his post in 2018, he worked as a lobbyist for Tencent, a Chinese entertainment company. Aside from penetrating the political circles, Red China uses its so-called cultural programs as a base for its intelligent network. The truth is, Confucius Institutes are the Chinese government's undue overseas influence and suppression of academic freedom.
United Front also runs Confucius Institutes. Recently, there were calls to ban them in America. Critics said these institutes try to control the discourse at American universities.
They're not just for teaching Chinese and exposing American students to Chinese culture. One of the things that's clear that Confucius Institutes aren't about is academic freedom. Now, who hires the instructors in the Confucius Institute? The Chinese do, not the university.
On August 13, 2020, the United States Department of State Director Mike Pompeo designated the headquarters of the Confucius Institute in the U.S. as a foreign mission of China. He accused the Chinese language institutes of working to recruit spies and collaborators.
Many of you are familiar with Confucius Institutes. Confucius Institutes purport to have the sole purpose of teaching Mandarin language skills and Chinese culture. A bipartisan Senate committee found last year in 2019 that the Chinese Communist Party controls nearly every aspect of the Confucius Institute's activities here in the United States. Over the past few months, the University of Missouri, the University of Kansas, the University of Maryland have independently decided to close down their Confucius Institutes after conducting their own reviews. And schools in 22 other states are doing or have already done the same.
Italy was the first G7 country to sign a memorandum of understanding with China on the Belt and Road Initiative in 2019. However, Italy has been invaded by the Chinese for years. The city of Prato has the second largest Chinese immigrant population in Italy. In 2011, local authorities estimated the number of Chinese citizens living in Prato to be around 45,000. Illegal immigrants included. Historically, Prato's economy has been the textile industry. Chinese immigrants quickly learned the trade, began buying and opening small firms, merging those firms, and replacing the older firms owned by Italian families. They focused on fast production of ready-to-wear fashion clothing, and employed mostly Chinese workers, who were much cheaper than Italians. Failing Italian firms began cutting costs by closing down and renting their warehouses to Chinese companies instead. Today, more firms in Prato are owned by foreigners than Italian, and over 70% of those owned by a foreign national are owned by the Chinese. The Chinese takeover of Prato created a social and economic downfall for Italians. In 2018, during an operation called China Truck, the Italian police arrested 33 people and their boss, Zhang Naizhong. The Chinese mafias control the movement of goods, covering half of Europe throughout Italy onto Paris, Madrid, and Germany. This operation is in addition to the usual extortion, running illegal gambling houses, prostitution, and drugs peddling rackets. The presence of Chinese mafia operating Italian textile factories, with tens of thousands of illegal immigrants in Italy, represent Red China's deep infiltration into Europe. And it aims to create a dependency on China. In March 2019, the port of Trieste was among the signatories to the Memorandum of Understanding between Italy and Red China, in the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. For Red China, having a foothold in one of Europe's historic ports, like Trieste, and other Italian ports, like Genoa and Palermo, would bring favorable customs conditions, a faster trade route to the heart of the continent, and direct access to railroads for moving its goods into the European Union. At the same time, the control of the ports allowed Chinese criminals to transport European goods to and from Europe, without benefiting the local European nations. Chinese investments in Europe have largely benefited Red China. During the pandemic, Germany sent medical personnel and equipment to Portugal. The goal was to assist a fellow EU member with its COVID-19 crisis. But the mission has been helping a Chinese-owned company running a luxury hospital in Lisbon. China is the European Union's largest trading partner. In December 2020, the European Union and China announced that they reached an investment deal, referred to as the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, CAI. But in May 2021, the European Commission announced plans to reduce dependence on China in strategic areas of the economy. The same month, the European Parliament froze ratification of the CAI, and announced that it will not proceed with the agreement until Red China lifts the sanctions it imposed on European NGOs and individuals, including several members of the European Parliament. For years, it's been an open secret that many Hollywood studios have been receiving funding from China, allowing both Chinese influences into their films, as well as censoring or changing content in order to allow for distribution in China. This influence has been steadily growing ever since China first opened up to the West in the 90s. In recent years, China has become the world's second largest box office market. But only 34 foreign films per year are allowed by Red China. This makes China's film market very lucrative, and an influx of foreign investors and film producers have shown willingness to cooperate with China. However, there are rules for making and distributing films in China. Because of the cap on foreign films allowed in China, a U.S. film has a better chance to be shown in China when the American companies jointly produce films with a Chinese company. Additionally, these films would receive support and funding from China. Films, like Looper, had to work closely with the Chinese government to fit this category. The production team essentially had to show a flattering portrayal of China. So for months, the production team worked with special effects artists to design and create graphic proofs of a stylish, futuristic Shanghai that the censors would approve of. After Looper, many other films followed suit, vying for the co-production status. Often, film productions would cast a Chinese actor or two in supporting roles, and try to include at least enough Chinese elements to scrape by. Looper even went so far as to have two separate cuts of the film, one US version, and one version for China. Sometimes, the influence is more subtle. Chinese product placement in American films that will be shown in China is a big component of many blockbusters, and most American audiences don't even notice. Some films that are unsuccessful in the United States can make it big overseas. For example, the 2017 film, Transformers: The Last Knight, was considered a flop in the United States, where it only made $69 million at the box office opening weekend. In China, however, it was a smash, raking in $123 million opening weekend. The content of films and media shown in China is heavily restricted and censored according to the political and moral values of the Chinese Communist Party. Filmmakers are often forced to work with the censors if they want a Chinese release, and either remove or edit enough objectionable content from their film. Because the censorship is so widely known, many filmmakers and writers are even starting to self-censor in advance by writing content specifically to appease the censors. With money and power, Red China inevitably silenced freedom of speech, which is a cornerstone of democracy.